friends, and thank you for joining us on Charting the Way Forward, where we deliver research-informed strategy and intelligence from across the Democratic coalition. This podcast is produced by Way to Win. I'm your host, Kerry Eleveld, and today I'm joined by
Tory, Gavito, president and co-founder of Way to Win.
Jenifer Fernandez Ancona, chief strategy officer and co-founder at Way to Win.
And Joe Hamill, senior strategic advisor here at Way to Win.
And I'm going to jump in for Molly Murphy and give her a real introduction since she's our special guest today to unpack a very timely poll we have conducted on immigration. Molly Murphy, of course, many of you know, is president of Impact Research, and Molly is a veteran pollster and campaign strategist who has helped Democrats prevail in a series of consequential statewide, congressional, and local races, including recently the races of North Carolina Governor Josh Stein. Thank you very much. That's very great for us. And Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan. We're happy to have her back. She has advised issue organizations ranging from Emily's List to Third Way, and served as a lead advisor for all the Democratic institutions, the D-TRIP, the DNC, the DSCC, and the DGA. If it's got Democrats in it, she's there. She also leads Navigator's Battleground Polling, which I have long been a fan of. So welcome to you, Molly.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so we're going to give Molly first crack at this poll, which frankly we're unveiling today. And we also there's also a piece, well, today will be Thursday when you're listening. There's also a piece coming out that's going to detail a lot of the findings in this poll, which we will be circulating on Blue Sky. So, but immigration continues. It's all about immigration, and immigration continues to be Trump's issue of choice. Though I will say a new Quinnipiac poll out today put him 11 points underwater on the issue. In our poll, which we should say was conducted several weeks before the events in LA began unfolding, most voters were still signaling approval of his immigration agenda. And yet, real cracks were emerging in our survey between Trump's policies and his implementation of those policies. So I'd love to start with you, Molly, sharing a bit about the cracks you saw emerge in the data and how Democrats can use that opening to go on offense.
Sure. And I think we're starting with, one of the most telling and important findings coming out of the poll, which is voters look at what Trump stands for, his rhetoric, his messaging on immigration very differently than how he is actually executing on those plans. They draw a distinction. And so this poll, which was in the House battleground districts, the most important congressional districts in the country, which will determine control of the House after this 2026 election, Trump had a narrow but still positive job approval rating on his handling of the issue of immigration, +1. We asked it two ways, though. We did a split test. We said, do you support or oppose the policies that Trump and Republicans in Congress have enacted on immigration? +1, similar to just his, immigration approval rating. But we then asked a separate question to the other half of surveys or respondents in the survey. We asked, do you approve or disapprove, do you support or oppose the way Trump and Republicans in Congress have carried out and enforced their immigration policies? And they're -5 on this measure. So you go from the idea of what he believes on immigration +1 to -5 on how they're carrying them out and enacting them. And that is the problem when you are president. You don't just get to say, here's what I'll do. I'll deport everybody. I'll round everybody up and get everybody on applause lines when you're running for office. Once you're in office, even if voters say we've got a problem with immigration, or I want to see action, or I like the way Trump is so muscular on it, they don't like what he's doing. And we see that throughout the survey when we really drill down into some of the stories of what has been happening with ICE raids, the people that they're detaining. And it's a real opportunity for Democrats to elevate this in the nuanced way that voters are drawing the distinction.
Yeah, definitely a real opportunity. And, let me just run through a couple of the baseline numbers, which you did. You hit some of the most important. But the big one to remember from this poll is 10. Trump's approvals on immigration dropped 10 points after participants heard the messaging in this poll. So the big takeaway is that the poll presents a strategic imperative and opportunity for Democrats to go on offense and shift attitudes on immigration. And frankly, the new Quinnipiac poll out today actually suggests an opening on immigration that Democrats can exploit. Now's the time to put the foot on the gas. And here's where Trump stood when this poll was in the field roughly a month ago. Molly went over some of the important numbers, but we also wanted to mention while Trump and Republicans had a slim majority for their policies, voters were already skeptical of how those policies were being carried out, as she said, opposing them, Trump's enforcement by a 5-point margin. And given the choice between Trump and Republicans going too far on immigration versus them being on the right track, too far won by net 7 points, including by net 14 points among independents. So voters were already primed to view Trump as overreaching on immigration. With that baseline in mind, Jenifer, what sticks out to you as most important given the current political environment, what's unfolding in LA and other places?
Yeah. Well, I think that point that this is a strategic imperative and real opportunity for Democrats to go on offense to start shifting attitudes on immigration is the most important point. And there was a big story in today's New York Times that was asking that question once again. The headline was "Democrats Enter Risky Political Terrain as Protests Grip California." And the question of, is this really something Democrats can talk about? It's a losing issue. And I think that's something that we often hear, right, in the ecosystem. And I just think this polling, again, which was taken even before this time period, just kind of puts that question to bed in some ways. It's like there is a way that we can talk about it. There is a really effective way to go on offense. And it's actually important that we do, because now, when things like this happen, Trump's overreach, which is completely historic in terms of sending National Guard troops to California, all the news of the reactions that you're seeing, the actual raids and what happened to people, it opens what we call a persuasion window. It changes, it opens a window in people's minds that can change their minds in a more rapid way than, if they're just normally going about their business and they're not thinking about immigration in this way. So because everybody is thinking about it right now, it is a really important time to step into that. And so I think one of the most important things is for Democrats to not take away that they have to be afraid or hide or, not talk about this because it's too risky, but that actually it's riskier to not say anything in this particular moment. And that this polling, which we're so grateful to have worked with Molly and her team, it just couldn't have come at a better time. That's how I see it.
Yeah, one of the things that we knew coming out of this is that Democrats' silence on the matter was actually hurting them. Molly, I know also in our back and forth between us, one of the things that you wanted to make a little bit of a distinction between was the polling being on immigration versus civil unrest that's happening right now in California. So I want you to give you a chance to sort of make that distinction. Sure. and tell us, how Democrats can respond effectively to move public opinion given what is unfolding there.
Sure. So I think there are a couple things here. One, as you watch what Trump is doing, calling in the National Guard, defying and not coordinating with the state officials, obviously now calling in the military, even more unprecedented. A lot of the coverage around this really is wondering whether Democrats can engage, whether this makes Trump look good, whether this is a good kind of flex for Trump. And I think the important thing to remember here is that this all started because of Trump's ICE raids, and that those are unpopular. And you see things like the Quinnipiac poll. And while immigration compared to some other issues for Trump is still a position of strength to him compared to his approval on other issues, it has come down since he took office. And Trump is a master in the art of distraction and changing the subject. And so when he is doing something very unpopular, which is these ICE raids, and our poll really does reflect that the nature in which he is rounding people up. You see in this poll by 24 points, battleground voters oppose immigration raids at churches, domestic violence centers, healthcare facilities. They oppose raids at schools. I mean, these are things that people don't support, even when they may support a tougher immigration approach in theory. He's changing the topic. He's moving this from being a conversation about immigration and border security to one about law and order and civil unrest. And one of the things that I see in our poll is the power of the storytelling, the examples of when you are conducting and executing your immigration policy such that you are separating parents from children, you're revoking visas and green cards from people who are here legally, you are detaining people who are either legal citizens, legal residents, or showing no proof of committing a crime. Those elicit, that's how we drove those numbers, that 10 points you mentioned at the beginning. And Trump doesn't want those to be the images here, right? That he wants it to be images of burning cars and protesters and violence, because that is where he can be strong in this. And so what should Democrats do? Don't take that bait. That's not what we want to be arguing here. This is fundamentally how he is going about enforcing his policies, whether it is extra legal when it comes to immigration and border enforcement, or when it comes to handling civil unrest, and focusing on that, not letting him win the distraction and the imagery wars, which is honestly, I think, what his tactic is.
Yeah, the original sin here, the ICE raids, how he's conducting them, who he's targeting, is a great focal point for Democrats, particularly in this poll. All those things you mentioned, raids in schools, domestic violence shelters, healthcare facilities, 60% or more of people oppose those. They oppose by 72%, separating parents and children who enter the country illegally together. And let's be clear, at base, many of these stories are family separation stories, fathers, brothers, uncles, providers being separated from their families, many of the stories that we're starting to see reported out. Tory, with your former immigration attorney hat on, what does this bring up for you regarding the fear being sown in these communities and how it erodes a sense of safety for all of us?
Yeah, I think it's important to note just how mixed status so many families are in their immigrant histories, in their immigrant stories, right? You may have scenarios where the kids are American citizens, or one sibling is and one sibling isn't, or a spouse is a citizen and one spouse isn't. And so I was really moved by Molly's point in what she last said about the power of story, that, we are hearing that people who are in the immigration system being processed by the normal steps are being taken by ICE or detained by ICE on the steps of the courthouse, where they are trying to follow the law to be here legally, right? And when that happens, ICE might sweep up a family of mixed status. And the power to tell that story for while everybody's talking about, how are Democrats engaging on this new, modern media ecosystem, we can just take the reins too. And so I think it's just an important time for young people, parents, anyone, get out the cameras and tell the story about what's happening, so that in fact we do turn back towards the harm that's being caused across the board. And I know that these arguments are made all the time, that as when I was practicing law, I can tell you the entire community becomes less safe if a few people in the community feel like they can no longer trust authorities to tell that something's happening to, right? So like, it's less likely that someone's going to call to complain about the real criminals out there, like real human traffickers or things like that, because they're fearful about the broad net that will be cast across an entire group of people that aren't even engaged in those matters, or maybe are the victims of those matters, and then it makes everybody less safe. So the enforcement mechanisms that Trump's using are completely ham-fisted and will do nothing to actually go back to solve the problems, which is like crime in the communities.
This reminds me a lot. I can't, I just can't get away from my background covering for 10 years. I covered the LGBTQ movement and the personal stories there of people and the way they were wronged and how it made America less safe in many cases to discriminate against gay and lesbian soldiers, for instance, who had special training or whatever. These were the personal stories that moved public opinion. So the personal stories here are, to Tory's point, I think are really key and something that Molly also brought up. I do want to run over some of the messages that worked. And Joe's offered to, he's been briefing people on this polling. And Joe, I was hoping you would take us through several of the best testing messages related to how Trump's heavy-handed enforcement is skirting the law.
Yeah, sure. Be happy to. I think, and at the beginning, as I'll say, we tested a ton of different messages. I think the whole battery was 14, 15 different versions of all sorts of different angles, sort of attacking this problem to figure out, which framing would move voters the most. So this was, we really did try to do our best to cast a wide net and figure out what was going to work. And the ones that raised to the top were ones that fit the theme that Molly mentioned about Trump not following the law, and I'll read sort of the specific paragraphs in a second, but also that his actions put everyone at risk, not just undocumented folks, but folks here legally and U.S. citizens. I think that's a big piece of our framing we need to continue to hit on, that everyone is at risk when Trump is executing these actions. So the two main messages that rose to the top were that Trump and Republicans' actions raise bigger concerns about citizens' rights in this country, and by arresting people without proof of a crime and ignoring the courts when they tell them to stop, Trump is saying that no one is safe if he wants to come after them. That was the best testing and most powerful message, and again hits at this sort of, as Tory said, ham-fisted way he is approaching this, getting all sorts of individuals wrapped up in his enforcement net. The second one hit on similar themes, which is also sort of focused on democracy, which is Trump is ignoring courts, arresting judges, and Republicans have failed to provide any check on his authoritarian power grab. And they're creating a constitutional crisis that threatens to completely undermine our democracy. So another one making this bigger than just its impact on individuals and really impacting the whole country, especially citizens. The last two that we had on like our top four was also an argument about due process, that Trump and Republicans are again breaking the law by denying people they deport due process, including hearings and legal representation. And then the last message that didn't sort of broke from this theme, but also hits on something Tory just said, is that recognizing that the immigration system is not working, but that Trump's immigration plans don't actually solve the problem, that all he has is this mass deportation, and they aren't doing anything to actually address the issues and solve these problems. This also goes back to, the sort of worldview question we asked about, is Trump going too far or is he right on track? And a lot of people in the gone too far. The second part of that is that we need a immigration system that, and I was going to pull the words up here, but that is functioning and that respects like the dignity and the humanity of immigrants. Those aren't the exact words in it. But that folks want this sort of this balanced approach. Enforcement that respects the rights and safety of immigrants, asylum seekers, and American citizens is the vision that people have of what an immigration system could look like. So that's the quick rundown. Molly, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. But please.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think it is bigger than just the singular issue. That's kind of the bigger piece, is like the issue matters a lot, and how he's executing in the human stories matter a lot in making this real. And I think one thing that we've seen in research over years on immigration is this is an incredibly complicated issue to people. It is nuanced. People can simultaneously want to control the border, feel like there's a fair process, feel like people, who shouldn't be here aren't here, but then who shouldn't be here, and where do you draw the line, and how do you figure out all of the families who have been here a long time, people who are paying their taxes? How do you fix a broken system? And I think that when we look at some of the examples, the stories can make it easier for people to figure out which side to be on in something that's fundamentally complicated. But the bigger piece that you made, Joe, is two pieces to me. One, it's bigger than just this issue. The enforcement, violating the law, violating the Constitution, not listening to the courts has much bigger ramifications than on a single issue or on a single type of, person out there, someone who was not born here, essentially. And then second is, this also doesn't fix the problem. And I think reminding voters at the end of this that this is nuanced and this is difficult. And if you're trying to solve the problem, this isn't it, is another way of helping people conceptualize of where to fall on this very complicated issue in ways that are compelling, because we see the movement once we do that and sort of put it to people just in that way.
Molly, you've worked on a number of campaigns, and I'm sure you've worked with politicians who are skittish, about this issue. What would you say to them now? I mean, now given the circumstances, we've got a president who wants to make this an issue, who also wants to turn it into something more than just immigration and move it into another realm. What would you say to them about taking back some of the power on this issue?
Sure. Well, I think you said it in your opening remarks. And the thing I couldn't agree with more strongly in what you said, and what I do tell my clients, is when you say nothing, you confirm their version of events. So what Republicans and Trump and the right, or however we want to define, that ecosystem, has said is that Democrats support open borders, they support no rules, they support lawlessness, they support burning cars, they support all of those things. And if we say nothing, we're telling voters that that's true. And so you cannot hide from this. And part of the reason that I think Republicans have the advantage, both Trump specifically and also the party generically, over Democrats on this issue, is they hear Republicans talk about this a lot. Democrats believe in a fair immigration system. We also believe that the system is broken. We believe that people who pose a threat to our country shouldn't be here. We believe that if you come here illegally, that there should be a process, right? Like, we don't actually support the things that Republicans say we do. And our silence is the problem. And so one is, you have to engage. You have to say what you believe. You have to say what you're for. The other thing I'll say is, when we don't say anything and people like what Trump is saying principally, we shouldn't interpret that means Trump has carte blanche. He doesn't. He talks about things in a very simple way on a complicated issue that makes sense. And we also can do that. We can talk about these things in a way that makes sense, that conveys that we see that there are problems with the existing system, that it is important to fix those problems in the system, but that Trump's way isn't the only way, and laying out a clear vision on it. And then I think the most important thing is really driving the problems with the way Trump is enforcing this. And I think that's, the messaging that Joe talked about and the messaging that we see in the poll is the way we frame that.
Can I ask a follow-up to that, Kerry? Because I'm kind of wondering, a couple of things. One is, there is so much fear-mongering in the Republican messaging that people hear, and it's really extreme. I mean, we've just been looking at some of the ads in the last election cycle, where there were so many ads on immigration and almost none actually on our side. Mm-hmm. And so you really feel, as you're seeing that, what you just said, Molly, of like, it's like listening with one headphone going and the other one isn't saying anything. So I guess I am curious, with the messaging that we have discovered in this poll is working in this moment to kind of like drag down how people view Trump around immigration. Do you see that? How do you see it going up against that fear-mongering message? Or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's hard to really know, because I think what you're saying is the perfect message only matters if voters hear it. And that means that by and large, you have to, in campaigns, this is heavily driven through advertising. It's heavily driven through paid targeted communications, whether that's through digital or social or television or radio. That's oftentimes how voters are going to hear it. And so we can come up with a great message in the poll that we know moves the needle, but if it makes its way into one press release and no candidates are willing to elevate it, then it's gonna not really amount to anything. I think in 2024, one lesson that I really took out of that is there were Senate and House races where there was much more of a back and forth, Republican fear mongering, Republican with all the open border and the imagery and all of those things. But then the Democrats responded. And what Republicans did that created a huge vulnerability was they killed the bill that they themselves said they wanted, the bipartisan immigration bill. And it really allowed Democrats, I think, to go on offense and call out they're not interested in fixing this problem. If they were interested in fixing the problem, we were at the table. And so I think it actually emboldened a lot of Democratic candidates who maybe in past cycles would have felt too hesitant to engage or not know how to be more muscular. And in the races where that was played out in the polling I was doing, you really would see bigger, sort of a narrowing disadvantage. And I think the other part is this issue is really important for Democrats to take on and to assert values on, because I think they're much more aligned with where the average voter is in terms of like being in the middle and seeing this as comprehensive, and that it isn't as simple as ICE raids and rounding people up. But I also think that it can sometimes take a long time to undo the cliches and the stereotypes and the caricatures. And sometimes I just think Democrats are afraid of losing something by less. They don't want to talk about something unless they're just fully going to win on it. I think that immigration is we could win on immigration, but we may not do that within one cycle, but we can certainly cut some of our disadvantages on the issue. Individual candidates can win on it. And that is a path towards building back credibility and not being, sort of pigeonholed as just one thing when it comes to this issue.
Yeah, which is, that movement over time is exactly what Republicans did, because Democrats used to have the sort of central position on this, which was a pathway to citizenship, fixing the broken immigration system, et cetera. So, and we were mostly, not everybody agreed on the pathway, but we were mostly on the side of voters there. And then Republicans sort of seized this issue. And it does seem like, for Trump, it helped him to talk and narrow it down specifically to the southern border and not talk about the greater complexity of immigration itself and how much work there really is to do. Yeah.
We're trying to wrap too, but or at least use Molly's time wisely. But I have a question for Molly, and I'm curious for everybody's take. There's this in new media, there's like this whole to get attention, people do wild things, but of course, the wilder the thing, the harder it is to persuade people that concept or that idea is good. And so, I saw Chris Hayes posting yesterday. He has the Attention book that was out earlier this year, and I saw him post yesterday that the more calm and serene and peaceful the protest, the less likely it's going to get all the media attention. And so it's almost this weird dichotomy where the cameras are going to go tightest on where there's the most ruckus. And of course, there's other stuff online that shows, grandmothers dancing and vendors selling hot dogs. And it doesn't seem like the LA protests are actually all that out of control. It's just like a couple focal points that the cameras get to. But knowing that window and knowing it's the candidate's job to sort of mark out where they stand. We're not going to control. We cannot control what activist art gets put online. We just can't. Just in the same way the right can't control what their activists put online either. And it can get real wild. So how does a candidate navigate that in this moment, do you think?
Yeah, it's a huge question. And I think it's one, this is maybe taking a step outside of the issue itself, but I think it was one thing that was very sobering in 24 and probably rooting back to 22. But the right does a better job of engaging in online conversations. They do a better job of elevating controversy online and finding an ecosystem that then spreads and shares their information. And I think that Democrats have been slow to be present there. And so I think sometimes it is just about creating dialogue that happens online that isn't just cutting down your campaign speech onto and then putting it on TikTok, which is not going to work for the format. And kind of, we always say meet people where they are. And when we do that, we meet from a messaging standpoint, but I think we also need to be smarter about doing it from a visualization and a, messenger standpoint. People are looking for validators out there. I think that you look at what they have on the right, and they have a lot more, sort of like viral influencer type content. They're not putting their elected officials out there saying on TikTok and on YouTube and things like that. They have these kind of media personalities made for the platforms, delivering a message that works for the platform and for the audience. And it can feel more organic, can feel more raw, whether it is then the sort of like, train crash imagery that you're describing where the eye goes, or whether it's just someone who's more bombastic and speaks in plain speak, like all of those things. I think we need to do a better job of it. And I think it starts with not just adapting, like taking our existing content and putting it on social and being in that place, but creating content that meets that audience there with messengers that they're more inclined to trust, which tend to be, less electeds. No disrespect to the elected.
Can I jump in, Kerry, before you move? Not exactly on this topic, a little bit backward, but just I think it's important to talk about this point about being on offense on this issue, and how, you mentioned, I was talking about the presidential, where there was a real disparity with how much immigration happened on their side versus our side, but there was a lot more on the Senate sides. But to me, a lot of that advertising was still kind of talking about the issue on their turf of it and being more defensive about it versus actually being offensive and talking about how Trump's plan to do mass deportation would hurt us all. Like the same messaging that we're saying now actually could have been said then, in an attack on his plans that he had put out. And that didn't happen across the board in a lot of places. So I just think that's important for us as we continue to talk about this issue, that it is complicated, but the more we can be on offense and not on their turf of the conversation is better.
I think that's right. And I think it's just inherently always more difficult when you're the incumbent party and it's a referendum on how you've handled any number of issues. And in the abstract, voters were telling us in 2024 that they supported deportations. Like, people don't think about what it looks like and what it feels like, unfortunately, until it happens. And so I think that gives us a huge offensive opportunity here, because now, in the way that they had us on defense on every single issue, because it is what it is to be the incumbent, that is now the role they're in. And voters are telling us that they do not like what they're seeing. So I completely agree. We would be missing a huge opportunity and an imperative not to take this on more directly, not to, drive the contrast of values and execution and all of those things that, they were able to do to us just, less than a year ago.
Well, I got to tell you, I have more questions, but I think that is a very good place to end it. And we so appreciate having Molly Murphy of Impact Research on, and I want to thank her. I want to thank Tory and Jenifer and Joe for joining me for a timely discussion on immigration and how Democrats can go on offense. And also thank you to our listeners for staying engaged in the work of rebuilding our democracy, which is expressly under attack by Trump Republicans and the MAGA movement right now. Please, if you appreciate our work, rate us, review us, do all the things so we can continue to build our footprint in the democratic ecosystem. Tell your friends about this immigration polling, which gives us a path forward, a start on a path forward. We can build on it, and look for it. Look for the print reporting that we're going to get, the piece that we're going to get on our Blue Sky about it, so that you can check out the deck yourself and all the findings. And with that, we will see you next Thursday. Until then, do good, be well, hug your loved ones, and tell your dog I say hi.